Joining me right now is Javier Manjarres, editor of the Shark Tank, shark-tank.com.
Very good.
Finally got it. And Rabin-Havt, host of The Agenda and former advisor to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Great to have both of you with us.
Thank you.
All right, well, now when it comes to support for Israel, new poll numbers, I should say, show that we're seeing a demographic shift perhaps among voters in the U.S. Last month, a Gallup survey asked if Israel's actions against Hamas were justified. Take a look at what folks had to say. Only 31% of Democrats said yes, but 65% of Republicans said yes. Pretty big difference there. Also, Pew did a similar poll during that same period. They asked which side was to blame for the most recent violence. Take a look at those numbers. Democrats were almost evenly split. 29% blame Hamas, 26% blame Israel. In contrast, 60% of Republicans blame Hamas. Now, Ari, over to you first. Jewish voters have traditionally been a bloc that Democrats can rely on here. Is there anything in those numbers that concern you about that?
What was interesting to me about the Gallup numbers, I haven't had a chance to explore the Pew numbers as in depth, but the Gallup numbers is the split is actually an age split. If you look at it, party comes second to age in that poll, and the younger the voters are, the more likely they are to be. The older they are, the more likely they are to be pro-Israel is the best way to put it. I think Republicans, for every election cycle I can remember, have claimed this was going to be the election cycle where the Jewish vote tilted rightward. It hasn't happened. Look, the Jewish voters vote on a variety of issues. They tend to be very socially liberal voters, actually, and so I don't see that changing very much.
But Javier, this might be considered different this time around here. When you look specifically at John Kerry, for example, who's taken a lot of heat on this, as someone who we know votes Republican, what do you think it is about?
Why do I vote Republican?
You may have mentioned a couple things that might tip your hat a little bit, but how do you think the GOP has done in terms of using this particular issue to court more voters?
Well, I think for the most part, the American people have woken up to what really is happening in the Middle East. I think they've turned a cheek like a lot of Israelis have in the past. What's going on there? It's obvious that they're seeing that Hamas is now part of their government now, and they are a terrorist element there. So now they see it's dawned on the whole Palestinian government that this is not. There's more to it here than what we thought before. As far as Republicans, it's helping them out because they're riding those coattails.
Now, we talk about Bill Maher, and on his show over the weekend, he's actually expressed some concern about the situation. We talk about what might be different this time around, the current conflict with Hamas and Israel, is the way folks like Bill Maher on the left are talking about Israel and Hamas. Let's take a listen to what he had to say on his program on HBO.
It's a war that Hamas started, and somehow when Israel reacts to this, they have to do everything in a way that doesn't kill any civilians. People die in wars. Now, I've said this before on the show, if the situation was reversed, Hamas would kill every single person in Israel. The reason why that's not happening is because they can't. Because they can't doesn't make them good, it makes them weak.
Yeah, and let's go a little bit further into that because things got heated. The conversation between Maher, Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times, and Reza Aslan got a little bit more animated. Let's take a look at that.
You're going to defend Hamas today.
I'm not defending Hamas. All I'm saying is that if you're going to have a situation where 1,600 people, 85% of them civilians, hundreds of children are being killed every day with American weapons that you paid for. Because they're putting them in front of them. That is nonsense.
That is not nonsense.
Guys, coming from Andrew Ross Sorkin right there, not a guy who I think a lot of folks would consider too conservative here. There just does seem to be more palpable rage this time, anger at the lack of what Hamas is doing and the lack of real support, I guess, on a global level for Israel here. Let's let Ari jump in.
Sure. I think that what Hamas is doing and has done throughout the course of its existence is gross. And I think any rational human being looking at what Hamas has done would say it's not only dangerous for Israelis, it's bad for the Palestinian people as well. The question I've always had with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and one that gets serious, because, look, I've had family who have fought and spilled blood in that conflict back pre the creation of the State of Israel. And the question is, how do we get to a place where we can end this conflict? How do we get past a place of this person's fault is this person's fault is that, and kind of redigesting history over and over and over again, and actually get to a place where children in Jerusalem, children in Tel Aviv, children in Ramallah, children in Gaza City can wake up without fear of having rockets launched at them or bombs dropped on them or a bus blowing up. I think that is the real question in a very tiny area. And every time I travel there, that is what people actually care about. And it, as opposed to rehashing and going back through everything that's been done wrong. And I feel like, frankly, this is something where you get into fights with people on everywhere about this because everyone wants to kind of state their history. The question is, how do we get to a place where Israel is surviving long-term as a Jewish state in Israel, and we're not in a constant state of war?
All right, Ari, let's leave that one there. Of course, we're not going to solve the problem here on this program, but worth a discussion anyway. Let's talk a little bit about domestic issues here. Senator Rand Paul had an exciting weekend in Kentucky where he debuted a limerick at a church fundraiser. Let's take a listen.
There once was a woman from Kentucky who thought in politics should be lucky. So she flew to L.A. for a Hollywood bash. She came home in a flash with buckets of cash. To liberals she whispers, coal makes you sick. In Kentucky she claims, coal makes us tick. To the liberals she sells her soul, the same ones who hate Kentucky coal. One thing that we know is true, one thing we know is guaranteed, she'd cast her first vote for Harry Reid. Grimes' real pledge is to Obama. Her first vote is to Reid. As for Kentucky, if that happens, it's too bad indeed.
Well, there you have it, master poet Rand Paul there on behalf of Mitch McConnell in his race against Grimes, McConnell's race against Grimes. It showed they're running neck and neck there. This is an insight into Kentucky politics, I guess. Ari, what do you think? This is going to work? We got some great cross shots there of Allison Lundgren Grimes in the crowd absorbing everything.
Will Rand Paul's poetry work? I mean, I hope he can find a second career one day as a poet, maybe taking some National Endowment for the Arts money to pursue that career.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's a very tight race. I find it interesting that Mitch McConnell, who 6 months ago was the bane of the Tea Party, bane of certain right-wing elements in this country, is now suddenly the savior. I mean, I think that change is somewhat strange to me.
All right. Go ahead, Javier.
I think it's kind of funny to see Senator Paul with this limerick. I never thought he had a sense of humor to begin with in the encounters I had with him. But again, I disagree with Ari. Look, at the end of the day, Tea Party conservatives like Senator Paul and Cruz, they're going to back Mitch McConnell, even though they disagree with him on pretty much everything. They have to retain that seat. I don't think Grimes will. I think she'll fall short in this race.
And they're convinced, the Republicans are, to try and, or determined, I should say, to try and make this race about President Obama and Harry Reid, not about Allison Lundgren Grimes. She's trying to cast it about her, separating herself from those two, but of course you're not letting her do that. Also, guys, we want to talk about Marco Rubio. And when it comes to 16, Marco Rubio comes up in a lot of conversations. He recently said, okay, we'll hold off on that for 1 second. Well, let's talk about Rubio anyway. He recently talked about Hillary Clinton being a 20th century candidate. Let's take a listen.
Well, I think you can be 40 years old and be a 20th century candidate. I don't think she or her party, and quite frankly, even some people in my party, have answers to that. And so our challenge for not just Republicans, but for the country, is to apply the time-tested principles of limited government and free enterprise to our modern challenges. She's incapable of doing that, as is most of her party, wedded to outdated and broken institutions.
Well, Ari, Rubio was really essentially calling Hillary Clinton their old school anyway, and I think it was pretty much a pretty smart turn on words. What do you think about his reaction there, his defense of the 20th century candidate? It's certainly something that Hillary has to be concerned about, no?
Well, I don't think Hillary has to be concerned about Marco Rubio, no. But if Marco Rubio is going to run against Hillary, that would be a smart theme for him to take on. I don't think he's going to get through a Republican primary, but if that's his theme against Hillary, it's a smart one.
But not just his, others. We can hear other
if
candidates.
If Rubio runs, Rubio will win the primary. He's the most electable of all. Even though I disagree with Ari, friendly with Ted. Ted's a great candidate. I think Rubio has the whole package to beat someone like Hillary Clinton.
Well, he'll have to talk and do a little bit more explaining about his evolution on immigration, enforcement first, or
that's
whatever. But we'll talk about that. Ari Rabin-Havt, great to talk to you as well.
Thank you.
Ari Manjarres.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you in. Javier Manjarres. John Bachman here, in for J.D. Hayward today. We have more coming up here on America's Forum. I keep talking about that interview with Pat Buchanan. He will join us very shortly. We're going to talk about his take on the immigration issue and what he thinks the White House might be up to. What do they have up their sleeve? We'll talk about that coming up. And of course, coming up, we will get to your comments as well. Not too late to write into the program. What do you think? What do you think the president's really up to here on immigration reform? Could he legalize some 5 million illegal immigrants? We'd like to get your take on the matter. We'll have those comments coming up later here on the program. More after this commercial break.